Most folks just want to be left alone, especially when all they're trying to do is live a quiet, honest life. That's exactly what Sarah Jensen thought when she moved to the edge of a sleepy suburban town with her small farm chickens, tomatoes, a worn-out barn, and peace. She wasn't flashy, didn't cause trouble, and never missed a neighbor's wave. Just a simple woman rebuilding her life after decades of service. But in a neighborhood run by a powerful HOA with more rules than sense. Quiet doesn't always mean safe. At first, it was little things, letters in the mailbox about her unauthorized garden rows, a fine for a tool shed that had stood since the 70s, and complaints about her rooster crowing too early. Sarah didn't make a fuss. She thought it was all a misunderstanding, but it didn't stop. If anything, it got worse. Fines started piling up. Board members began showing up unannounced. One even threatened to report her for violating landscaping codes. The message was clear. They wanted her out. What the HOA didn't know? Sarah wasn't just a mild-mannered farmer. She was a retired Navy commander. 20 years of leadership, discipline, and grit were stitched into her every step. She'd led rescue missions, negotiated with foreign officers, and stared down situations far tougher than a rude neighbor in khakis with a clipboard. But Sarah had hoped those days were behind her. She wasn't looking for a fight. She just wanted to plant carrots and raise hens in peace. Still, the line had been crossed. And when the HOA tried to take legal action to force her off her own, land claiming non-compliance, something in Sarah shifted. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't slam any doors. But she dusted off a part of herself she hadn't needed in years. And as the next HOA meeting approached, no one had a clue what was coming. Not the board, not the neighbors. Certainly not the smug president who had signed the last warning letter. Because this time, Sarah wasn't backing down. Sarah hadn't always been the quiet woman with dirt under her fingernails and a basket of eggs in her arms. Before the farm, before the chickens and the endless HOA letters, she wore a uniform every day and answered to a rank. Commander Sarah Jensen had led missions halfway around the world. She'd worked with men and women from every walk of life, kept her cool in pressure most people would crumble under, and knew how to navigate power structures far more complex than a neighborhood board. But out here, in the middle of suburbia, she didn't flaunt that part of herself. It wasn't who she was trying to be anymore. She had chosen this life on purpose. After retiring from the Navy, she bought the run-down farmhouse just outside the city limits. It had good bones and just enough land to grow what she needed. Her plan was simple: work with her hands, breathe some fresh air, and finally live a life on her own terms. For a while, it was peaceful until the HOA decided she didn't fit the community standard. They called her front garden an eyesore, said her fence was an inch too high, claimed her driveway gravel was non-compliant. Sarah always kept her responses polite. She showed up at meetings, made phone calls, filled out paperwork, but no matter what she did, the complaints didn't stop. The board treated her like some clueless outsider who didn't understand how things were done around here. She knew better. The real issue wasn't about fences or paint colors. It was control. The HOA president, Greg Whitman, had a reputation for targeting anyone who didn't play by his unspoken rules. And Sarah, she didn't play games, especially not ones designed to push someone off their own land. Still, she held back until Greg sent a notice threatening legal action if she didn't immediately dismantle all unauthorized farming structures. That was the final straw. What Greg didn't know was that Sarah had already started digging into the HOA's bylaws, into past board decisions, even into Greg's own background. And what she found, let's just say, things in this neighborhood weren't as clean-cut as they looked. Sarah wasn't the only one fed up. After weeks of quietly asking around, she discovered she wasn't the HOA's first target. A retired couple down the street had been fined thousands for putting solar panels on their roof without prior design approval, a single mom had. Her kid's backyard swing set labeled a safety hazard. Even a veteran with a mobility ramp had been told it violated community aesthetics. Most of them had either given up or caved under pressure. Some moved away. Others simply went silent. Sarah saw the pattern and now she was part of it. But Sarah wasn't wired to be silent. Each evening, she sat at her kitchen table sorting through stacks of old meeting minutes and HOA newsletters she requested under the public records policy. What she found was troubling. The HOA, led by Greg and a close-knit group of longtime board members, had quietly changed several rules without proper votes. Fines were being issued without documentation. And the so-called violations seemed to always land on people who didn't fit the board's ideal image of the neighborhood. Sarah wasn't a lawyer, but she knew when something smelled off. She began documenting everything: phone calls, conversations, letters, even drive-bys from board members. She wasn't just defending her farm anymore. She was building a case. Meanwhile, whispers were starting to spread. A few neighbors began stopping by, nervously glancing over their shoulders just to thank her or share their own run-ins with Greg and the board. One neighbor, Mr. Patel, even gave Sarah a copy of a complaint he'd filed years ago that mysteriously vanished from HOA records. Another dropped off photos of Greg's backyard, a backyard that featured the same kind of garden shed Sarah had been told was against code. But none of that seemed to rattle Greg, at least, not yet. In fact, Sarah noticed something strange. A black SUV began parking across the street, engine idling for hours. One day, her mailbox was open, papers fluttering in the wind. And when she got home from the market one afternoon, one of her chickens was missing. This wasn't just a code dispute anymore. It was getting personal. The air around Sarah's farm started to feel heavier. Not with weather, but with something unspoken. Eyes lingered longer at the grocery store. Cars slowed when passing her gate. Even her usual peaceless sound of wind through the trees. The soft cluck of her hens began to feel like it was being watched. She knew pressure tactics when she saw them. This wasn't about chickens or sheds anymore. It was intimidation. Then came the certified letter. The HOA had filed a formal complaint with the county zoning office, accusing Sarah of running a commercial farming operation on residential land. It was bold and false, but it was enough to trigger an inspection. Two officials showed up one morning, clipboards in hand, asking questions and snapping photos like they already had their minds made up. Sarah answered calmly, respectfully. But inside, she felt the heat rising. The community meeting was just days away, and this one wasn't going to be routine. Word had gotten around that Sarah had something to say. People who hadn't been to a meeting in years were planning to attend. Greg, meanwhile, kept a cool public face, but behind the scenes, he was busy, calling allies, tightening his grip. He even sent out a neighborhood newsletter warning residents about a disruptive member spreading false accusations. Sarah didn't flinch. Instead, she doubled down. Every piece of evidence she had gathered was now organized in a binder: photos, letters, legal documents, bylaws, timelines. She'd also contacted a veterans' rights attorney for guidance and confirmed that HOA retaliation could be legally challenged. Her military instinct kicked in. Prepare for every outcome. But stay 3 moves ahead. The night before the meeting, her farm was dead quiet. Too quiet. As Sarah walked her property, flashlight in hand, she spotted fresh tire tracks near the edge of her lot. Her garden gate had been left open. One of her hens, this time the prized Rhode Island Red, was gone. Again, she knew it wasn't a coincidence. This was deliberate. Someone was trying to rattle her, scare her into silence. But Sarah Jensen hadn't backed down overseas, and she wasn't about to back down here. The war had come to her front yard. And now, it was her move. The morning of the HOA meeting arrived under a gray sky, the kind that made everything feel heavier. Sarah rose early, checked on her animals, and made sure every document was packed in her bag. She'd planned her words carefully, sticking to facts, keeping emotion in check. But just as she was about to leave, her phone buzzed. It was a neighbor, Mr. Patel. His voice was low and urgent. "Sarah, you should know. Someone slipped a letter under my door last night. Anonymous. But it had your name on it. And Greg's." Sarah froze. What kind of letter? "It's about Greg. Something from his past. You need to see it." She drove straight to his house. Inside a plain envelope was a single-page printout. An old court record sealed, but partially leaked. It listed Greg Whitman's name in connection with a property fraud case from nearly 15 years ago in another state. Charges were dropped, but the details were ugly. Shady land deals, falsified reports, silent settlements. Sarah's hands tightened around the paper. It made sense now. The control, the manipulation, the buried threats. Greg wasn't just power-hungry, he was hiding something. But this changed everything. If Greg sensed she had this, there was no telling what he might do. And now, she wasn't just dealing with zoning complaints and stolen chickens. She was poking at the reputation of a man who had everything to lose. Later that afternoon, as she prepared to leave for the meeting, she noticed something strange. "Our truck always reliable,"